Hey guys, I am Heather Franks, and my missionary biography is over Bill Wallace. And so I didn't really know anything about Bill Wallace when I chose him. Before the start of this class, was just given a book about like Bill Wallace of China. I was given that book, and so whenever I saw this assignment, I was like, I'm just going to choose it. So the only thing that I knew about Bill Wallace is that he had something to do with China, but come to find out, he had a very interesting life and a meaningful life, an impactful life, and it was really cool to get to study him, to learn about him. And so I'm just going to kind of just briefly go over his life, especially his like early childhood and even his mission work. I'm just going to briefly do that, but he was raised in a Christian home. His mother died when he was young. He was converted at a young age, and at the age of 17, he asked the Lord, "What is it that you would have me do for the rest of my life?" And the Lord called him to do medical missions, and he surrendered to that calling. And so his early adulthood was just preparing himself for that. He went to UT Knox. He did medical school in Memphis. And he even did his surgical residency, where he turned down an offer to be a partner in a practice because he knew that that was being disobedient to the Lord. And so he wrote the now IMB but Southern Baptist Foreign Mission Board, just being like, hey, I feel called to do medical missions. I think it might be Africa, but I'm honestly willing to go anywhere. And at the same time, the Southern Baptist Foreign Mission Board was receiving a letter from Dr. Robert Bedeau in China requesting a surgeon, saying, hey, if we don't get a surgeon, we can't continue doing the work. And so Wallace ended up in China. He left for China in 1935. And the time when he was in China was pretty strenuous. It was during Pearl Harbor, the Korean War, communist invasion. All of these things were taking place while Wallace was in China. And so not only did he serve the physical needs of the Chinese people, but he also was able to serve them spiritually just through all these extreme situations that they were enduring, and just the war in their country, and just bombs and all these other things were going on. And I know that that was a very brief introduction to all of his service and his childhood and everything, but I feel like a big bulk of who Bill Wallace was rests in his death and his legacy. And so he was in China during the start of the Korean War, and being an American and being a missionary was really unwelcome there. And so they knew who he was. The communists came to his house, checked under his bed, and found a gun and accused him of being a spy. And so he was arrested and put into prison, where they did some extreme tactics to try to coerce a confession from him. None of this ever worked, but it was extreme situations, some beatings, abuse, mistreatment, all these things. And then that happened for a few months, and then in 1951, he was found in his prison cell dead. The communists claimed that it was because of suicide, that he had killed himself, but his body did not reflect that, and so Bill Wallace died a martyr's death because of his faith. And so his body had to stay in China. There was like all these rules that came into play. They could not transport it back to the U.S., and so his body stayed in China, but his Chinese friends honored him by placing a placard at his grave that said, "For me to live is Christ." And so they really chose a verse that reflected Bill Wallace and the sacrifice that he made for the Lord. And in 1985, his body eventually made it back to the U.S., and his legacy still lives on today. He was so impactful to all the people that he served and that he loved, but even today, there is a hospital in South Korea that is named in honor of him. Even in Knoxville, there is a church that is Wallace Memorial Baptist Church. So Bill Wallace left a lasting impression on missionaries and Baptist people of today. Just the legacy that he lives is something that is to be honored, and it honestly was really cool to get to learn about that. And honestly, just someone from my home state that carries that much weight and legacy for missions is honestly pretty incredible to learn about. So that's just a little bit about Bill Wallace, and it was really good to learn about.